His book, Every Man, God's Man, Kenny Luck tells the story of a senior sales executive named Danny. Now, Danny was a Christian who faithfully attended church, but he was also very focused on his job, and he was a tough boss. One of his sales managers, Cameron, had been late to a quarterly sales meeting, and Danny chewed him out in front of everybody for his tardiness and for his drop in sales in the previous quarter. Then Danny saw another one of his employees, someone who worked for Cameron, at church one day. And as they talked, this employee told him, "Hey, be praying for Cameron, because in the last few months his wife's cancer has come back, and he is absolutely devastated." Now you can probably guess how Danny felt. He was ashamed that he had ignored the things that were going on in Cameron's life because he was so focused on his job and on the bottom line. He was so wrapped up in his own world that he didn't see or care what was going on in the lives of other people. Now I tell that story because often we treat God the same way that Danny treated his employee. We get so wrapped up in our world and our own circumstances that we respond to God in exactly the wrong way. We ignore God and what He might have for us because we aren't paying attention to Him. And when we hear about the love and the grace of Jesus, we don't respond in faith. We typically respond to God in one of three ways, either in pride or fear or faith. Now, God obviously wants us to respond to Him in faith. He wants us to believe in Him and follow after Him. Unfortunately, when we respond in pride or in fear, we aren't doing either one. Now, those ideas of responding to God in pride or fear or faith are kind of abstract, and they might be hard for us to understand in practical terms. So what I'd like to do today is to take a look at how people responded to God in Scripture in these three different ways, so we can see what that looks like, so we can learn how to respond to God in faith ourselves. The first way we can respond to God is through pride. In 586 BC, God had had enough of the idolatry of the people of Judah, and so He sent the Babylonians to destroy the city of Jerusalem and to take the Israelite people captive into Babylon. During their time in Babylon, Babylon was the most powerful nation on earth. They had the greatest military strength, and much like the Assyrians before them, they sought to conquer as much of the world as they possibly could. The man at the very top, the king of Babylon, was named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was basically all-powerful within his kingdom. What he said went no matter what. And this particular king was known for being cruel and for being ruthless. The historical accounts of what the Babylonians did to the people that they laid siege to are pretty horrific. And Nebuchadnezzar's punishments for those who didn't do what he wanted them to do were equally as ruthless. Nebuchadnezzar was the one who nearly killed all of his wise men and advisors because they couldn't tell him what he dreamed about and interpret his dream without him ever telling the dream. Pretty big ask. They were saved only because God gave Daniel the gift of interpreting dreams and showed him what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was. He's also the one who demanded that all of his officials worship a statue that he had set up as a god. The punishment for not bowing down to that idol at the king's command was to be burned alive. That idol is the one that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to. When they were cast into the fire to be burned alive, they survived without a hair on their heads being singed because God intervened. There was no eighth amendment in Babylon that forbade cruel and unusual punishment. There was only the will and the whim of a king who seeks to enjoy making people suffer. Nebuchadnezzar was used to that kind of power, and he was used to getting his way and making sure that everyone was afraid of him and followed his orders without question. He also thought of himself pretty highly. Even after the show of God's power that he saw with his own eyes when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were saved from the flames, he still saw himself as the top dog, the very top. He thought everyone else should bow down to him and praise him for his majesty and his power. He seemed to think that he had a godlike status, but that's when he found out who God really was. In Daniel chapter 4, we read this. The king answered and said, "Is this not great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. And you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field. And you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will." See, that's exactly what happened. The high and mighty king suddenly was out grazing with the cattle in the fields, instead of dining at the banquet halls in the palace. It wasn't until 7 years later that his mind was finally restored and he finally acknowledged God for who he really was. Something similar happened to Herod Agrippa in Acts chapter 12. Again, Herod was a cruel and ruthless leader who was used to getting his way no matter what. He wasn't afraid to make people suffer to get his way. He came from a long line of men who were exactly like him. Now, there are a lot of Herods in the Bible, so really quickly I want to go through who this Herod is. Herod the Great is the Herod that we read about in the early pages of the Gospels. He's the one that the wise men went to when they came to Jerusalem. He's also the one who slaughtered the babies in Bethlehem to keep his power and his position. His son Herod Antipas is the one that we read about through most of the Gospels. He was the one who Jesus was put on trial before when he was crucified. He's also the one who put John the Baptist to death to please his wife, who was also his brother's wife and also his niece. Really stand-up guy. His nephew, Herod the Great's grandson, is the Herod we're talking about here in Acts chapter 12. He's the one who had the apostle James executed. And then when he saw that people were happy about that, he subsequently had Peter arrested just to please his constituents. So Acts chapter 12, verse 21, it says, "On that appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat on the throne, and delivered an oration to them." He gave a speech. And the people started shouting, "The voice of a God, and not of a man." Immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. Now Josephus gives us a few more details to this situation here and what happened. He says it was 5 days before he finally died. He was struck, he had that pain in his stomach, the worms eating him from inside out for 5 days. It's not a very fun way to go. Now God's issue with Nebuchadnezzar is that he acted as if he deserved the glory and the majesty that belonged to God alone. His issue with Herod wasn't anything Herod said himself, it was that he didn't correct people when they called him a god. He allowed people to revere him in a way that should have been reserved for God alone. He allowed himself to be honored and revered as an idol, and it cost him his life in a very unpleasant way. Now those are pretty extreme examples of people responding to God in pride. One that's a little closer to home might be the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders. When Jesus taught and he healed people and he led his disciples to follow after him, the Jewish leaders weren't happy with what he was doing. They grumbled about who Jesus spent time with. They complained about the disciples not following their laws and washing their hands when they thought they ought to. Others complained that the disciples didn't fast when they thought they should. They complained because they thought their ways and their rules were better than the ways of Jesus. Later in his ministry, the Pharisees challenged Jesus to tell them by whose authority he did the things he was doing. If the Pharisees were modern day folks, they would say, "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" Now, how many times have you heard somebody say that in response to God? We fall prey to responding to God in pride all the time. I think pride is probably the biggest reason why most of the world will never meet Jesus, never give him a second thought. If they can be convinced even that God exists, then they certainly don't think they need him. So we respond to God in pride when we think we know better than God. When the scientific community dismisses the idea of God as a fantasy because they can't prove it through their experiments and their tests, they're responding to God in pride. When a person says they don't need God, they can handle their own life and their own decisions on their own, they're responding to God in pride. The arrogance and the audacity that it takes for us to say something like that to God or even to God is incredible. That would be like me telling Peyton Manning, "You know what, I think if you hold the football this certain way, you might be able to make that pass a little bit better." It'd be like me telling Warren Buffett how he might improve his investments, or telling Tiger Woods how to sink that big putt. For us to think that we know better than God about anything is pure arrogance and pride. We also respond to God in pride when we think that what we want is more important than what God wants. I think this is probably what affects us in the realm of pride more than anything else. When push comes to shove, who is your devotion? What becomes your priority? For many people, everything else on the calendar comes before God. They give God their time if they have some extra. Work, their kids' sporting events, hobbies, everything comes before God. How many times have you heard someone say that they would make time for God when life slowed down a little bit? That they would make God a priority when they had more time. They would start coming to church maybe after they retired. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I don't think life tends to slow down. So they're basically saying that. But you make time for God and follow after Him, all depends on if you are willing to make God a priority. When we don't do that, our pride is getting in the way of our relationship with God. Pride is a kind of idolatry. When our response to God is that whatever is on our schedule, whatever we desire, is more important than God, then we have put ourselves in a place that only God deserves. Exodus 20, verse 3 says, "You shall have no other gods before me." That means God should be the most important thing in our lives. That means that we cannot be the most important thing in our lives. It's a revelation to a lot of people. When we make ourselves the most important thing in our lives, we knock God out of that position that only He deserves. And when we do that, we are responding to God in pride and not in faith as we should. Jesus said in Matthew 22, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment." If we love ourselves more than we love God, we are not following His commandments and putting God first. When we do that, we are falling prey to exactly the kind of attitude that makes us respond to God in pride instead of in faith. Now, the second way that we can respond to God is in fear. When we respond to God in fear, it's either because we're afraid that following God is going to cost us something, or we're afraid that God is not going to come through and do for us what He says He will do. Moses' first encounter with God has fear written all over him. God appeared to him in a burning bush, and when Moses came near, God spoke to him. And God told him He was going to send Moses to Pharaoh to free His people from slavery in Egypt. And Moses immediately had a list of excuses for why he couldn't go because he was so afraid. In verse 11, he said, Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, he says, Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" See, Moses was afraid that he wouldn't be good enough. He was afraid he didn't have enough power. He wasn't powerful enough to tell Pharaoh what to do. Verse 13, he says, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is His name?' what shall I say to them?" See, he was afraid he wouldn't know all the right answers. That he was afraid he'd be put on the spot and not know what to do. In chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" Moses was afraid even if people listened to him, they still wouldn't believe him. He didn't want to look foolish. He didn't want to go through all the trouble of going up to Pharaoh if people weren't going to believe in him anyway. Verse 10 it says, "O Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." So a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. If that's you, you're in good company, because Moses is there too. He initially didn't think he could do what God asked him to, because he was too afraid to go and actually do it. Verse 13, he finally just said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Moses was simply afraid to do what God had asked him to do. In John chapter 3, we see a man named Nicodemus, who wasn't just afraid of doing what God had called him to do, he was afraid to even be known as someone who followed after Jesus. It says, "Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, 'Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs unless God is with you.'" So Nicodemus was afraid to challenge the status quo. He was afraid to follow Jesus in an area that he didn't understand. He was afraid for his peers to know that he was coming to Jesus to talk to him and ask him questions. And so he came at night, so no one knew them. How do we respond to fear ourselves? Well, we don't share our faith because it might make things awkward. We don't stand up for the truth because it might ruffle some people's feathers. Sometimes we're afraid to even let it be known that we follow Jesus because we're afraid of what might come, just like Nicodemus. When we let our fear take control, it can be paralyzing. It can keep us from doing things we would normally do because we get caught up in the unknowns and the risks that are involved. I had a friend in high school, and we probably picked on her a little too much for this. But her parents, when she started driving, made her wear a bicycle helmet. Not while she rode a motorcycle, while she drove a minivan. So until she was 18 years old, she wore a bicycle helmet while she drove her car. We may have picked on her. I knew another family where a mother would not let her 23-year-old daughter drive if it was raining or snowing in Indiana. And so anytime there was any kind of weather, the mother took off of work to drive her kid to her work, and then she would come back. See, those aren't normal behaviors. Right? That's living in fear of anything that could possibly happen. Trying to avoid all risk and all danger, always living in that kind of fear, makes us lose the peace that ought to be characteristic of disciples of Jesus. When we respond to God in fear, it paralyzes us spiritually. We can't follow God or do what He asks of us because in our mind the risks would just be too great. They outweigh the rewards of following Jesus. That's a lie that Satan uses to keep us on the sidelines, to keep us from being ineffective, or to keep us ineffective in the kingdom of God. When both Moses and Nicodemus overcame their fears, then they became faithful followers of Jesus. In the end, Moses ended up being one of the strongest leaders that Israel ever had. He was held up as the standard of leadership in that culture. Nicodemus became more and more bold as he learned to follow Jesus more faithfully. The more he learned to put away his fear and trust in Jesus, the more he became a public figure of the Christian faith. In John chapter 7, we see Nicodemus stand up for Jesus among all his Pharisees, all the Pharisees that were with him. They wanted to condemn Jesus without so much as a trial, and he stood up for them. He was ridiculed for doing so, but he didn't let the fear of that keep him from doing what he needed to do. The next time that we see Nicodemus is after the crucifixion of Jesus. He and another man who had also been a secret follower of Jesus, who didn't want to be known as a follower of Jesus, asked that the body of Jesus be given to them so that they could prepare for burial and bury him in a tomb. These two men, who had been afraid to even let people know that they followed Jesus, went publicly and asked Pilate for his body, really marking themselves as followers of his. If we want to follow Jesus well, then we have to overcome our fears and let trust in God to respond to God in faith. The third thing that we can do is we can respond to God in faith. For all the people that we see fail to follow Jesus well in Scripture, or fail to follow God well in Scripture, we also see many who follow Him very well. In Hebrews chapter 11, there's a collection of a lot of people, not an exhaustive list, but a lot of people who followed God very well, who were faithful to God throughout their lives. They believed that God would do what He said He would do. And today I want to look at just two examples for the sake of time of people whose response to God in faith has always astounded me. Now the first is Mary, the mother of Jesus. When Mary was just a young teenage girl, had never been married at all, she got a visit from the angel Gabriel, and this is what he said to her. In Luke chapter 1, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." And Mary said to the angel, "How will this be, since I am a virgin?" And the angel answered her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. For nothing will be impossible with God." Can you imagine being told like that at the age of 14 or 15, or maybe even younger? The weight of being the one to bear the Son of God and raise him in the world had to be absolutely enormous. Now the implications of that in our culture today would be huge. But in the culture that Mary was in, that she was born into, it would have made it even more of a struggle. The fact that she was going to be pregnant and she wasn't married yet meant that she would be looked down upon and ostracized from her community. Had God not intervened in Joseph's life, he would have divorced Mary because of the pregnancy. Mary had to know all those things were probably going to happen. She had no doubt seen others go through unwed pregnancies before her. Now you would think that Mary's response would be like Moses's, that she would object to what was about to happen, that she would have tons of questions, that she would have tons of ideas about what God should do differently. Her life was about to be turned upside down, and it was going to look nothing like what she had planned it to look like. Despite all of that, this is how we see her respond. In verse 38, it says, "And Mary said, Behold, I am a servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. Now the word that Mary uses there for servant is the Greek word doulos, which means slave. She was declaring herself to be under the ownership of God, committed to doing whatever he directed her to do, no matter what the consequences. That is what it looks like to respond to God in faith. Now, the other group of people I want to look at are the disciples of Jesus. These young men had grown up in a fishing community. And if you had asked them, they probably would plan to spend their entire life on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, doing exactly what their fathers had done before them and their grandfathers had done before them. This was a family business, the fishing community they were in. They were busy learning the fishing trade from their fathers, just as their fathers had learned from their fathers before. These guys were expected to take on the mantle. They were expected to go into the family trade, to continue the legacy. And then Jesus came along. Matthew chapter 4. It says, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called to them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now these men and all the other disciples, they left behind all that they knew to follow Jesus. They left the trade they had learned since they were young. They left their equipment that surely did not come cheap. They left their families behind to continue the fishing trade without them. There were no complaints. There were no questions. There was no bargaining. They didn't run the numbers to make sure the family business would be okay without them. It may not have been the best business practice, but man, it was incredible faith. Jesus called them, so they left immediately, no questions asked. That is what it looks like to respond to God in faith. So how do we make sure that we don't respond to God in pride or in fear, but that we respond to God in faith as well? Well, first we have to overcome our pride with humility. James and Peter both tell us that God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And that's because the proud always put themselves before God. They respond to God in pride when they put themselves in a place that only God deserves. The antidote to the poison of pride is humility. Humility requires us to put others before ourselves. And in our relationship with God, it requires us putting God and his will for our lives above ourselves and our own wills and our own desires. We have to recognize our position before God and make sure that we are giving him his proper place in our lives. God should be the most important thing in our lives. Anything else, anything less, and we are in danger of responding to God in pride. Secondly, we have to overcome our fear with trust. When we fear what might happen, or we fear that God might not come through for us, what we're really trying to do is to control the situations that we face in our lives. We want to make sure we have everything well in hand. We don't want to have to rely on God, because that can scare you. I had a lot of trouble trusting that God would come through for us and provide for me and for my family at first. And for me to learn to trust in God, it's multiple experiences of God providing exactly what we needed when that was the only way that things would work out. We've had many, many experiences like that have trained me over time, longer than it should have taken for me to trust in God, but it trained me over time to trust in God. If we're going to overcome our fear, we have to trust that God will take care of us and he will provide. And finally, we have to unconditionally surrender to God. Now imagine for a moment that if in 1865, that Appomattox Courthouse, General Lee had said that they would surrender to Ulysses S. Grant on the condition that they still got to keep their slaves in the South. That's not much of a surrender, right? What if Germany had surrendered to the Allied forces on the condition that they got to keep Poland for themselves? See, those examples seem pretty ridiculous because that's not how surrender works. If a surrender is not unconditional, if you are still holding on to something that needs to be given up, then you haven't really surrendered yet. The example of a war is actually very fitting because we are in a war with our human nature and with the evil one to follow after God. Our natural inclination is to hold on to the things that we ought to be letting go of. We tend to fight God to keep control. I often imagine that to God we probably sound like a little toddler who keeps saying, I will do it on my own. You hear that a lot of times. But that's not how surrendering to God looks. If we really want to respond to God in faith, we have to make sure we are fully surrendered to Him. That we surrender everything in our lives that needs to be given over to God. Hanging on to anything that we ought to be surrendering to God ends up in us responding to God in either pride or in fear. If we can come before God in humility and we can trust in Him to provide and trust in Him to be in control and fully surrender to Him, then we can respond to God with the kind of faith that Mary had when she fully surrendered to God as His servant. The kind of faith that the disciples had when they left everything they knew behind to follow after Jesus. God did incredible things through Mary and through the disciples. God can do incredible things through us well if we will only respond